Welcome, Brian. I hope you're hearing me really well. Is that coming out pretty good?
Very good, Gloria, and I think I even understood your Spanish, so I'm learning.
That's great. I'm so glad. You know, there's no age to stop learning, I guess. Brian, thank you so much for accepting this interview. We have audience from all over the world connected to the radio, and I think it's a great opportunity for people to learn not only about how to use clean energy or what this idea that I heard in your speeches about, what was it, free energy or 0-point energy that could do for us. But before getting into the Yasuni subject and all this matter about the energy, the way we could use alternative ways of energy, I would like to know a little bit about you so the audience will too. And if you can tell us, you were an astronaut in the NASA for the Apollo 11 and also for the Apollo project and also for coming to the project for Mars. And I would like to know what made you change your direction to the spiritual realm and the ways that are maybe in some way a little distant from the scientific world.
Well, good question, Gloria. Well, in 1967, I was appointed as a NASA astronaut, a scientist, to be the first to go to Mars. And that was when it was still in NASA's program. I had just completed my PhD work at the University of California in Berkeley, and it was about Mars. So scientifically, at that time, I knew a lot about Mars, and so they appointed me to go there. And then in 1968, the United States got very involved in Vietnam, and so that canceled the Mars program. And so then I became a professor at Cornell with Carl Sagan and others, and I stayed in the NASA program as an unmanned planetary explorer, so to speak, for several years. But then when I was at Princeton University in the physics department, and now we're jumping ahead to 1979, I had some unusual experiences. I had this. I took this workshop. It was a human potential experiential training called LifeSpring, and it changed my life. I suddenly realized that yes, we're spiritual beings, and yes, we have special abilities that we can, through our consciousness, actually create realities around us that are really quite different. And so I went through my own paradigm shift about 30 years ago. And interestingly enough, that my teacher then, his name is Terry Tillman, and I are coming together again after 30 years to co-facilitate or co-teach a workshop that you're coming to in about 2 weeks called Transforming the Dreamer. So it's interesting how life, how certain things happen in your life that can be just profoundly changing. And what I discovered through the years is that the straight scientific approach to life, as interesting and educational as it can be, is not where we need to focus our efforts. We need to look ahead at ways of cleaning up the earth, of taking care of our environment, because human activity now is not very sustainable. So we moved to Ecuador 5 years ago, Meredith and I, and we've been leading an effort here at Montasueños to bring in people from all over the world to educate people about the possibilities such as free energy, many other developments, and of course I'll describe the free energy in a little while, but that these concepts have not been understood, and they're certainly not out there in the media. They haven't been understood properly by most people, but we actually have the potential to totally clean up the planet And this could be, especially in the way in which we use energy. We don't have to use oil anymore. We don't need grid systems. But these developments, which have been around for a while, have been suppressed because the oil companies and the powers that be want to keep their power and not have energy become free, because then we wouldn't be needing oil anymore, or nuclear power, or hydropower, or some of the other power sources that are used throughout the world. So it's been quite a life, Gloria, and we are so happy to be here in Ecuador and to be now beginning to work with people in this country to create a future in which hopefully the rainforest can be left alone, where oil companies won't be going in there, the indigenous people can be left alone, and all of the beautiful signs of nature, the flora and fauna of Yasuni National Park and other areas here, can be preserved for all time. And that's my wish, that's my hope.
Brian, out of all the places on the planet, what made you choose Ecuador to come here for creating the retreat or your new home?
Well, Gloria, it, like any other story, it's a long one, but it really wasn't that long. Meredith and I were getting to about retirement age, and I was starting to get Social Security, and we also saw, living in the U.S., we were living in California, that there were problems coming up where retirement or my later years would not be affordable, for one thing, and also where some of the ideas that I've been presenting and promoting are not accepted by the large corporations and the U.S. government, which really answers more to the special interests rather than to what's possible in our future. So I thought Ecuador would be a great place to do this kind of work, and to be able to also live affordably, and to be able to work on some of the political issues that are happening here, and then involve also perhaps more free thinking, more open thinking about how we can solve some of our biggest environmental problems.
I guess now it's a great time in our evolution to start thinking globally, like we are part of a planet, not part of a country. And in this way, it seems that people are starting, because of the technology and the internet and how it connects us. A lot of people all over the world are starting to feel this idea of being one, like the earthquake in Chile had consequences in Europe and all over the places. So we cannot consider ourselves anymore divided or separate, and this kind of consciousness is starting to become more evident or more clear for people. Have you noticed this consciousness growing all over?
Yes, and I hope it develops enough so that it comes in time to solve our problems, because as you no doubt know, there are two kinds of globalization. The kind of globalization which has taken hold of many countries like Ecuador, the so-called neoliberal policies of companies coming in and drilling oil and mining and leaving a mess behind, and countries like Ecuador being dependent on that kind of activity. That's not very good, and all of the loans that have to be paid back. So that's globalization at its worst. Globalization at its best, I think, as you suggest, that through the internet, through people awakening and becoming more aware of what's possible and what a mess humanity has created so far, but how that may not be really necessary, and how can we come together and organize ourselves for a whole new world, for a whole new paradigm of consciousness. And that's exactly what I go around the world and teach about. So I'm basically an educator, and I do see a lot of hope in what you suggest, that if people can awaken and also stand up to the old policies and say, no, we don't want war anymore. We want to leave the indigenous people alone. We want to leave the environment alone. And we want to have clean energy. All of these things are crucially important. And so now people need to awaken more about what these possibilities are.
Now, Brian, as you might imagine, most people know that there is something that needs to be done in order for us to save the planet and ourselves, obviously, because that's probably the major reason behind our interest in trying to protect the planet, is our own survival. Yet, most people nowadays are so involved in the system that we don't know what we can do, so nobody does anything. What are your suggestions as to what each person can do to help in this idea or this project of working together to protect the planet, because it's our home and we need to keep it safe?
Absolutely, Gloria. Well, there are many things we can do. The first step is to just become aware of the possibilities that lie ahead. For example, so-called free energy or zero-point energy. These are energy sources that have been researched that appear to be totally clean and could replace oil and nuclear power and hydropower and even solar and wind. It's a much more advanced way to power, to produce electricity, to produce fuels for transportation, that we can do all of that if enough of us become aware of it and insist, in other words, confront the system, which is right now very, very corrupt, to be able to insist that we develop this kind of thing responsibly and ethically, so that we can save our precious planet. I think what's happening now is that, as you say, people are confused. Many people have been bought out by the system, and people don't even know what the possibilities are. And so, I had to leave the university in order to do my work, because universities don't want to consider these things. It's not part of the mainstream. It's not scientifically acceptable by the culture, even though it's scientifically very well proven. And of course, this has happened since the beginning of time. But the willingness to go against the grain, if you will, to not listen to the mainstream media and what they have to say, and not listen to the presidents of countries and the corporate chiefs who are basically running the world. We have to take a whole different approach. And what this requires is thinking outside the box, thinking absolutely newly about many questions, such as how do we use our energy, or how can we keep our water supply clean. These are all crucially important questions that require solutions that are very, very bold, that are very different from what most people have been led to believe. So the first step is always education. And that's why, for example, I teach workshops. I go around the world and give talks about these things. And a lot of people become really motivated and interested. And then they ask, well, how can I join? Well, one way of joining is once you get your education somewhat and learn about what these possibilities are, then you can take your skills, whatever they might be, and lend them to the new effort, whether it's activism, protesting, cooperating with certain friendly elements in the government, or getting on just like right now, getting on the radio. All of these things, my website, for example, many people go to my website. That's brianoleary.com or brianoleary.info to get some of their information about what these possibilities are. Then people can get excited and they email me, and they come to Motosueños. They want to know what kind of conference or workshop might be available. And then then people can decide for themselves, well, what is it, what special skill do I have where I can help? Can I help, for example, just doing routine technical support or computer work, or maybe my talent is interviewing people like yours is, and or it might be any number of possible outlets where you can express and join the team and take part in the creation of a whole new paradigm. And that's what I'd like to see happen, and I'd like to see it happen soon. And I think Ecuador is a great place to begin many of these things, because it's been my experience that the people are very, very friendly here. I've had good relations with many people in the government, some of the indigenous people here. I am just absolutely blown away by the beauty of nature here, and I'm also deeply concerned about how mining, logging, and oil drilling can just totally ruin the environment here. So we're living in a time now we have to all become activists. We have to insist that we need a different future from what we've seen so far.
Do you believe that if we, the common human being, if we all create a demand for these alternative energy sources, that the people on governments are going to actually do something about it, or the big corporations are going to do something about it?
Well, this is, of course, the hard question. The corporations, and we're talking about really big corporations like the oil companies, like Chevron Texaco. They came in here to Ecuador, as you know, back in the 1970s, in 1980s, and they totally they just totally destroyed the environment and killed many people through the water supply being diseased with oil and other mercury and other toxic substances. And so those kinds of people, I don't think are the ones we'd be working with here. It would be more sort of like an open rebellion. And I'm not talking about a violent one. I'm talking about bringing in the new in spite of the old. So, for example, the indigenous people, as we all know, they're challenging the Ecuadorian government and saying, we don't want the oil companies in here. We want them out. We want to keep our land, and we want to keep the biodiversity of the land. And so there's a great big conflict now, and unless the government of Ecuador listens to these people, there could be some real trouble. Well, I don't want to see that happen, and I don't think it's necessary for that to happen, because there are many new ideas that could be implemented that could provide the needed sovereignty for Ecuador and its government and its people by trying on new ways of doing things, like some of the new energy technologies. So we don't need the oil, or not having to use materials like grid systems that would use a lot of copper, so we wouldn't need to mine for copper. We could just leave the land alone and let it heal while we then implement these new programs. We could create jobs through having an earth core or a group. Many people could be employed cleaning up the environment, reforesting the land. I'm sitting here in Vilcabamba in southern Ecuador, looking across the valley at the Andes, and there are almost no trees there. Well, that's terrible. We need to plant trees. We need to do many things to clean up the environment. And I think that Ecuador has a wonderful chance to do that, because unlike the United States and some of the big countries, the emphasis is not on the military or fighting wars. It's a very peaceful country, which we very much appreciate. So it's time now to replace such things as oil with very clean energy sources, which could be developed here if there's enough incentive, if there's enough initiative. And that's one area where I come in on, is that I've created on my blog an idea called the Ecuador Initiative, which I've shared with, for example, Alberto Acosta, who is very sympathetic with the idea of leaving the oil in the ground in Yasuni National Park. He was the head of the Constituent Assembly that drafted the new Constitution of Ecuador, providing for the equal rights of nature and of the indigenous people. So it's a matter of education. I think that's the number one point now, is that people, and most of us, let's face it, we're caught up in the system. And so we don't really know what the possibilities are that could truly make a difference, because the corporations, whether it's through media or through oil companies, they don't want you to know about this. They want to keep making money, and that's not going to work. It might work for them, but it certainly doesn't help the other people of the world.
Now, Brian, you mentioned the use of alternative ways of energy, about the free energy, but actually I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you explain to me, what do you mean by free energy? How can we understand what is this idea of free energy or other sources of energy? Please help us understand that.
Okay, yeah, this is a hard one because it is so unusual, and if you, as a listener, if this is the first time you've ever heard about this, it's going to take a little more than that. I would suggest my website's a good place to start. But it's basically, the concept comes from some principles of physics. In quantum physics, we know that the vacuum of space, which means every point in space and every point in time, whether it's on the Earth or in outer space, every point in time-space has an enormous potential energy field. It's sort of like a reservoir that's just waiting to be used.
Do you refer, like any point in space, do you refer to like the dark matter, the space?
No, not really. That's another question. So we don't want to confuse it there. But the point here is that there's an enormous potential energy field everywhere in time and space. But we haven't learned how to tap it. It's been suppressed. It's been not understood by most physicists, although some physicists now are beginning to understand it. Is that this energy field is absolutely enormous, and there are various ways of tapping it. And one of them is to create an electromagnetic field that vibrates with this so-called free energy field, and then allows you to get electricity out. And the electricity basically comes for free. You don't see it until it actually comes out of the vacuum. And it's sometimes called the zero-point energy, meaning that it still exists at temperatures of absolute zero. Now, I know I'm getting into some physics here, and many people may not understand what I'm saying, but the crux of the matter is that I've gone all around the world and visited many inventors and researchers that have demonstrated successfully the existence of this energy basically out of nothing. And so this energy has been known for a long time, and it's been demonstrated many times, ever since the time of Nikola Tesla, about 100 years ago. But the problem is that whenever anybody starts to move this to a practical device, then the powers that be, the large energy companies, suppress it. And they even kill people who are fairly successful in trying to develop this. They stop it. In other words, the choices that we've made all along in which energy sources we use are made by the elite, by the corporations that are in charge of the world. And so the common people, like the rest of us, haven't had an opportunity to really understand this, because as soon as something begins to be successful, then it's stopped, either through bribery, through threats, or through actually killings. And this is the history of this field. It's not a very happy history, but it's one that I think that to the degree that we can become educated and understand that this is possible, that we can have an abundant future, that people can have their own little free energy devices in their homes or in their vehicles, and that we won't have to rely on grid systems or big power plants that are remote. We don't have any more blackouts, no more wires going around the landscape, no more hydropower, no more oil refining or burning, that will really be able to clean up the planet. But the problem is that we have to get beyond this point of suppression. And this has happened, by the way, throughout the history of technology. Any bold new technology, when first suggested, is very, very much resisted. This is what happened in aviation. When the Wright brothers flew the first airplane in 1903, nobody believed it. Even though they were flying and lots of people saw them fly, it still never made the media. It never made the scientific community until years and years later, when it became obvious to more people. This has happened throughout history. So really the big step that I'm talking about here is overcoming ignorance and moving ahead and understanding what these possibilities are, and then we can then start to talk about, well, how can we organize ourselves so we can ethically implement these new technologies so that they too aren't abused and become the weapons of war or the instruments of great corporate power. We all know that the history of the world, the whole history of civilization for 6,000 years, and here in Ecuador for 500 years since the time the conquistadors came, that there's been one problem after another of exploitation of the people, exploitation of the resources. And so some of us feel that's really not necessary. And even though it's happening right now with the oil companies going into the rainforest, for example, that we can stop it, that we can come together and stop that, and instead, in its place, figure out other ways of producing an income for Ecuador and for the people, and be able to clean up the planet at the same time.
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind when I hear what you just explained to us, which I think is just amazing and powerful and beautiful. And what comes to mind is that it is amazing the greed that human beings carry on themselves. The more they have, the more they want, and I should say the more we have, the more we want, and that because I'm a human too, and I believe that this kind of greed of the big corporations is just what is the major step to killing life in the whole planet. The second thing that comes to mind is that science fiction is probably more advanced than science, because when you talked about the energy fields, all I could think of was Star Wars, and how all the things that we see in this kind of science fiction, that we see it as science fiction, is probably something that we are in the capacity of creating in our futures, obviously, hopefully not with the stars part, with the war part of the stars, but the energy fields and all those kinds of things. It just seems that those things are closer to us than we could ever possibly think of with the development of quantum physics. And then the third thing that comes to mind is that it seems that we have a continuous fight between the rigidity of Saturn and the new energy of Uranus. There's a huge conflict between the past and how people are completely attached to the old ways, and they don't want to let come in the new possibilities that are for the better of all. And so I don't know if in the middle of this, this chaos that needs to happen, because human beings don't seem to react unless something really chaotic is happening around them. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that was well said, Gloria, that there's no question we're coming into a new paradigm of consciousness, and now could not be to do that. And so meanwhile, while we're waiting, we need to be very activist, we need to be aware, we need to know what is possible. And as you say, most humans and most human systems resist that. And it's really sad, because if we look at the gravity of the problems we've created for ourselves in the entire history of civilization, and we're talking 6,000 years, and then we add on top of that the fact that we live in a time now when we are a global culture, where the human population has become enormous. We're talking almost 7 billion people right now, and with the fact that the resources, and especially in places like Ecuador, the wonderful natural resources are being raped by the greedy people, we need to become more and more aware of what's happening and what's possible. And in order to do that, we need to kind of clear our minds, get beyond the confusion. And unfortunately, though, it seems like for most of us, we have to have a crisis. We have to have a huge wake-up call, a big problem, to be able to embrace some of these things. So, to my way of thinking, the best thing that you or I or anybody, any of your listeners can do is to begin to understand how serious the global environmental and violence that is happening now, that has to stop, and that we have other ways of creating a peaceful and sustainable future. And if we can believe in that, believe that we can make these changes to the degree that each of us can stand up in our courage and confront those issues and then act on them, is the degree to which we'll be able to do it. Meanwhile, it becomes a very lonely task, a lonely battle, because there aren't very many people out there that are even aware of how serious the problem is, and how the fact is that we do have solutions if we get around the corporations, if we get around the brainwashing that's happening now in the mass media. It's a big job, but the more of us that are able to jump in and do it, then the sooner we can make the needed changes.
I have a question from a listener, and she says, what do you think we should do to make the rest of the people understand that the planet is in a big danger?
Well, how do we make people aware of that?
Yeah.
Well, people need to read. They need to look at websites, read books. There are several wonderful books out. One of my favorite writers about how serious the problem is a man called Derek Jensen, who wrote a book called Endgame, in which he says that human civilization must change or the Earth will be destroyed. There certainly are many, many books. Now, I just passed my 70th birthday, so I tend to read books and go to libraries. I'm old-fashioned. And I would suggest people, your listeners, do the same thing. With the Internet, of course, there are many environmental websites. There are, especially in places like Ecuador, we have Amazon Watch, AmazonWatch.org, there's UpsideDownWorld.org, my websites and blog. If you go to my website, Brian O'Leary, Brian with an I, BrianO'Leary.info, then you'll see a link to my blog where I write quite often and give links to wonderful websites that describe the situation right here in Ecuador and how seriously threatened the rainforest is in the Amazon by large corporate interests. So these are all things that people can do just to become educated about how serious the problem is.
once we know or we are educated by reading, by informing ourselves of this, what do you think would be the next step?
Well, I think a functioning democracy is one way to do it. I think Ecuador has a better democracy than the United States right now. The people of Ecuador can really make a difference. So political activism is one thing you can do. There's economics, which is that you can develop alternative technologies. I know of some people outside of Quito that are developing wonderful technologies to clean up oil spills and to develop alternative fuels. And I'm not talking about biofuels. I'm talking about alternative fuels that can truly make a difference in terms of pollution and efficiency. There are many things you can do, both at the economic level, educational level, or you can just be involved politically. Because, like in Ecuador, you know, if the people don't like the government, then they go to the presidential palace and bang pots until the president leaves, and then we have a new government. I think here there's a lot of hope, though, because the new constitution really does focus on the rights of nature. There are many other ways that people can get involved, and I think that here in Ecuador, especially, there's a wonderful opportunity for people to become politically active and to actually create solutions that will allow a much more environmentally conscious civilization to unfold right here, without having to rely on big multinational corporations to provide income for the people of Ecuador. So there are many issues, I think, that can be discussed and debated here. And there are many things we can do to change things. I really do think so.
Brian, I don't know if you know already that there was an earthquake in Turkey yesterday, and that sums up to the earthquake in Haiti and the other one in Chile. Now, what relation do you find between the earth movement and the earth wanting to shift inside and the shift of paradigm or whatever's happening with the global collective consciousness or unconsciousness of people?
Well, the earthquakes, I think, yeah, we do have to watch it. Up until now, I haven't really been convinced that there's that much unusual happening, but I could be convinced of that if, let's say, we have even more. Certainly there's some horrible weapons out there that involved with some of the top secret government of the U.S. and elsewhere that could get in the way of the kind of transformation we need. But I do believe, as you do, that our collective consciousness can make a very big difference. And that's another reason why I think this education of people to become aware and to awaken and to understand how bad things are, but how good things could be, just to be able to get to that point in your education will mean that you can jump in as part of the new team, and that together we can align our consciousness and actually create miracles in the physical universe. And I know there are a lot of scientific experiments to that end. I know the workshop that you and I will be involved in, I'll be teaching some of that, about the possibilities of how our combined positive intention can literally change things in the world for the better. And it's that kind of healing energy now that we need to all participate in.
Brian, there are some people that start to believe that there are some secret weapons being used by powerful governments to create disasters in the planet. I don't know if you know about the Harp in Alaska and how they are manipulating the IO zone or something like that. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I do, and I'm just I feel so sad and sorry that the United States, which is the country that I was born in and am a citizen of, would have gone to those extremes to create such a huge military infrastructure, including secret weapons. And the Harp Project is something that I totally do not support. I think it can only be dangerous. It does interfere with the ionosphere and the magnetic fields of the Earth. And there may be a lot of effects that we don't know about that's created by this project. So I think one of the things we need to do when we come into this whole new world, this new paradigm, is that we need a peaceful world. We need to lay down our weapons, all kinds of weapons, and create a peaceful future for ourselves. Here at Montasueños, which is our retreat center outside of Vilcabamba in Ecuador, we are focusing on peace, sustainability, and justice as the three main concepts that need to be developed here worldwide, maybe with Ecuador being the crucible for change, a place where innovation can proceed in a very peaceful way that can then create all sorts of new ways of doing things that people will actually enjoy doing, and where we can have an abundant future in harmony with the environment. That's what I'd like to see happen.
Now, Brian, I remember hearing in one of your conferences that you met Carl Sagan, but he didn't believe in metaphysical ideas. In what way do you think that metaphysics by itself can be of any help in our evolution or in our consciousness?
Well, yeah, metaphysics, as we know, it's a branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of reality. And what I discovered when I took this workshop from Terry Tillman, my friend, who's coming here to teach one in a couple of weeks, is that our reality, our awareness, is far greater than we've been led to believe in materialistic Western science. In other words, cause and effect operates at a much higher level than that which has been accepted by the mainstream of our Western culture. And metaphysics then explores many of these ideas from a very general point of view and comes up with many answers about how our consciousness can literally change the world. For example, through healing or through mind over matter interactions, that we can actually experience a much greater reality and our own reality in reflection to who we are through the practice of metaphysics and consciousness. And that I didn't know about when I was a mainstream scientist. So when I taught astronomy at Cornell with Carl Sagan, at that point, even I was not much aware of metaphysics, and it was only afterwards that I opened up to that, and I began to realize that most scientists in the Western world, they miss the boat. They miss the whole concept of why we're here, of our existence, of the fact that we probably do reincarnate, that we have souls that live on forever, and that we come into bodies for a while to experience and grow. And there are many principles of metaphysics that are simply missing in the Western scientific mind. And Carl, whom I knew very well back in those days, this is back in the 1960s, Carl and I used to debate this some. He was an atheist. He really didn't believe there was any God, there was any higher unifying force that brought us together here on this planet at this time. And I grew to disagree with him quite a bit about that as I got more and more into my own metaphysical training.
Now, if, like, let's say we believe, you believe, I believe also in this strength or this power that's beyond what we can imagine, like the metaphysical or the mystical or whatever that goes beyond our human present brain development or capacity of understanding certain things. Now, what do you think it would take for this huge force to react, to react to what has been done by, like, the U.S. government with the Harp Projects and so many things that they are keeping quiet? What will it take in order for that to pay its own debt for creating something that is so harmful?
Well, that's a good question, Gloria, and I've pondered that many times. And I'm coming, the older I get, the more I begin to understand that there is, of course, a principle in metaphysics called karma. It comes from the Hindu and Buddhist cultures of the Far East, in which whatever action that we commit will get a reaction. It will reflect back upon us. And so it's very clear right now the U.S. government is involved in creating very heavy karma, just like fascist Germany did in the 1930s and 40s. And so there will be a payback time. But I'd rather leave that up to spiritual forces rather than creating a violent revolution or focusing a lot of energy on that. In other words, I have too much work to do just in educating myself and other people about the possibilities of free energy. I tend to focus on the solution rather than the problem, although I can't help but read how severe the problem is by reading articles about HARP or about the torture that goes on, or the wars that are being fought over oil, or the exploitation of oil resources right here in Ecuador through various manipulations of neoliberalism. There are so many negative things happening, and I do read about them, but I do as much as I can to focus more on the positive and to conceptualize what is possible, and to hope that enough people will be able to implement that in the future.
One thing is clear from what we have talked so far, and is that the more people research, the more they get informed, the more aware they will be, and the more aware that the more awareness there is in oneself, that can help bring awareness to other people, and it will be like the 100 Monkey Project, that suddenly a lot of people are starting to become so aware of this thing that's happening, that the force and the strength of the consciousness of people can actually help stop and make very little all the weapons that are being created to in the name of I don't know, in the name of wanting to see how powerful human mind can be in creating all these kinds of things, and so it is amazing that so many things are happening at the same time. That there's this dark side that is growing as much as the light side is growing, and yet the education is completely fundamental if we want to do something of a change in the world. So absolutely.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. That's really what we're talking about here, is that there are dark forces, and they seem to get more and more dark with time, and there are also light forces that get more and more light with time. And so we're in this struggle right now, and the Earth hangs in the balance. Our precious environment here, and what people decide to do one way or another, either we're going to destroy ourselves and destroy a lot of nature and our fellow beings on the planet, or we're going to stop doing that and work with the light, which many of us hope will prevail. I hope I live to see the day when the forces of light really begin to take over, and we have the 100th monkey, and that people are often running toward a brilliant, bright, positive, abundant future. That's my hope.
Do you think that will happen within the next maybe 10 to 20 years, that there's going to be a shift of consciousness in the whole planet, that people are really going to start shaking up and doing active manifestation of a desire for change?
Well, I think that's really up to us, isn't it? In other words, if not enough people awaken, and that's why I say this is so important for your listeners or for anybody out there that you're in contact with, to become educated and understand what the issues are, what the possibilities are, what the dilemma is. To the degree we can understand that is the degree to which then we can begin to take action. And the more of us that have the courage to stand up and say, no, we don't want the system the way it is. We want this new kind of system. To the degree we can do that is the degree to how soon the consciousness shift will take place. So I hope it's this year or 2012. Or if it's 10 or 20 years, well, that's better than not at all. I just want to see more and more people join together in consciousness and for the good of all concerned in a non-violent shift to a new paradigm of reality and consciousness.
Brian, what are your thoughts about all these ideas about the Mayan calendar and the 2012 and all these catastrophes that are being predicted?
Well, again, I'm not much of a predictor. I'm not. I've noticed that most people that make predictions usually turn out to be wrong, and because I was trained as a scientist, I tend to spend more time looking at practical things like free energy devices as a potential for solving the energy problem. So perhaps 2012 will be a nexus, a intersection of various forces that will create a big change for the planet. I hope a change for the better. It's certainly, we're going to have front row seats for this, and we may hopefully be able to actively participate in whatever changes do take place in 2012. So we just kind of keep doing our work and keep educating, and that's my position anyway.
What do you know about that galactic alignment that they say is going to happen, and that void that is created somewhere between Sagittarius and Ophiuchus? Whatever happens in outer space is obviously going to affect us somehow. We have this huge Jupiter that helps us prevent that all the asteroids come directly to Earth, and that's amazing how even as our bodies are created in such a way that it seems to be perfect, as well is this planetary system. And so most people don't even believe that the outer space has any effect on what happens here on Earth. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, that's a whole different topic, of course, and indeed, I believe there are many influences, and I think you're right, that our lives, just the fact we exist and we're on this beautiful planet with beautiful nature, is a miracle. Just the fact we're here. And that in itself should cause a lot of deep reflection and thinking. And of course, there are influences from outer space. I think, for myself anyway, I think we've had throughout our natural history a lot of interactions with the rest of the universe. The Galactic Alignment, which is really we're part of a big galaxy, the Milky Way, and it turns out that there will be an alignment in 2012 that happens every once in a great while, where the plane of the Earth's orbit intersects the line to the galactic center, and There may be influences there. Scientifically, we haven't, definitively established that, but we do know that the positions of planets do affect us. There's certainly, obviously, the practice of astrology. So there are many, many ideas out there, metaphysical concepts that are playing out, and even though the results are maybe a little less certain scientifically, they're certainly worth having a look at. And again, I kind of return back to, looking at the practical question, what do we do about the environment? Well, what we want to do here on Earth, meanwhile, is do the best we can to become responsible and ethical stewards of planet Earth. And so far, humans have made a mess of it. And that's something we can really solidly do something about. And that's why I'm around doing the educating that I am right now.
Thank you, Brian. I know that the major theme of our conversation is the natural resources and free energy and all those ideas. But still, I have a huge curiosity to find out what was your major discovery that really had an impact on you when you were an astronaut, your major discovery of the outer space that really hit you center and maybe, I don't know, opened you to a different realm of existence.
Well, I think that the fact that I was selected to go to Mars, and of course I didn't go because I canceled the program, was a real breakthrough for me, because I began to realize that, gee, I might be one of the first, or if not the first, to go to another planet. And this is pretty exciting because we don't know anything about this planet. We know very little about it, and it's evolved just like the Earth over the last 4 billion years. What is it going to be like? Was there a civilization there? Questions like that would come up to me, and I thought, gee, we live in terribly exciting times. But it wasn't until after the astronaut program, when I started to do my exploration of inner space rather than outer space, that I really became quite turned on to the concept of the fact that we need to preserve our precious Earth. And so my gaze then turned more inward than outward for our solutions. So I really think it was a progressive kind of thing, but I think the astronaut appointment was an important step on the path toward being willing to be courageous enough to look at things that most people wouldn't dare look at, and to be able to also directly challenge the system. For example, when I left the astronaut program, when it was clear we were not going to Mars and going to Vietnam instead, I became a war protester. And most of my friends thought I was crazy to protest the war, but I felt just within my heart and soul that was very important to do. And ever since then, I've been a very radical environmentalist, and I don't regret a bit of it, even though the system hasn't accepted me very much. I've had to leave the university, everything, as soon as I got into free energy research. But it's really important, I think, for people to be able to stand up to the propaganda that's being dished out by the system, and to really think for themselves about what the real solutions would be.
Brian, well, first of all, you're not the only one that feels kind of out of the system. I'm there with you.
Right.
Do you think that there's a possibility that if we continue in our careless behavior towards planet Earth and our natural resources, and if we are not able to develop new ways of having free energy for us, that we will end up sort of like a Mars planet with nothing, no life?
Absolutely, Gloria. I've often thought about that, because if you look at the photographs of Mars, there's definitely signs that there may have once been a civilization there and it destroyed itself. There are dried up riverbeds there. Mars is now a desert. You can't have liquid water on the surface of Mars. It would either boil away or freeze. And there was a time in the past when that wasn't the case. It was more Earth-like. And there's a suggestion even of some archaeological features, of a slight suggestion that needs following up. So yes, this is the fate of the Earth. At the rate we're going now, if we don't do something about our situation, then within the next 100 years or so, or even sooner, we could destroy ourselves, nuclear war, or just what we're doing to the environment. If we don't change our ways, if we try to wring every last drop of oil out of the earth and go in and rape the resources of the earth, and where the deforestation just becomes complete, then and let's say global warming or climate change just really takes effect, then we may have gone beyond the tipping point, and that the future would be like Mars, and that is really sad for me to contemplate, because it doesn't have to be. And that's what people, I think, need to awaken to. Mm-hmm. That it just doesn't have to be that way.
Yes, hopefully we wake up before it's too late. The other day I was talking to a friend that made me a comment that really struck me. He said, well, probably what happened in Mars came from a form of life like the humanoids, like what we are. And let's think about, first of all, we are not the older species on Earth. We are not natives to planet Earth, because bacteria and the bacteria has been here millions of years before human beings were here. And he said, how about if we look to the humans from the eyes of the bacteria? Would we actually, as bacteria, see the human beings as how they consider themselves the best thing that is on Earth? And that really made me think, it's like we think we are the best thing that could be on planet Earth, that we are the most intelligent species, that we are the most evolved species. And what we are doing is, what we are accustomed to do is to destroy ourselves. We cannot overcome greed. We cannot overcome ego. And like your black pig, I don't remember the black pig name that you have on your conferences, the Lampus people, I don't remember his name. But it is like that.
The Lampus pig,
yeah. Well, we seem to consider ourselves the best thing that it happens on planet Earth, with no consideration whatsoever to the rest of the species that we cohabit with, even nature. And as long as we keep with this arrogant idea of who we think we are, it seems that we are going to create chaos and destruction more than anything else. What do you think about that?
Absolutely, yes. I think we have to be really honest and take a good look at what we know about the natural history of the Earth, and the fact that human evolution has occurred quite recently within that time scale, and that ever since civilization began in the Middle East 6,000 years ago, humankind civilized itself, but it did it in a way in which competition and greed became a cornerstone rather than being in balance with nature. And the indigenous peoples have known this for a long, long time. We can learn from them. And meanwhile, the people that are in charge, the corporations, the large governments of the world, have been incredibly greedy and exploitive. And it just means the humankind is an experiment which, at the rate we're going, will definitely fail. It will become a cancer that would destroy ourselves if we don't straighten ourselves out. We need to really reflect on that and see if there's a chance, and I think that move it. That's my hope.
Okay, Brian, I think we're starting to have a little problem with the connection. We've been on for an hour or so, and I would love to keep on talking with you forever, and I hope I get to do that when I can see you down. Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with, to ponder, to consider about what we need to do before we finish the interview?
Well, sure. I think basically what we've been talking about, Gloria, and it's been a great interview, is that we have to awaken. We have to become aware of what humans have done to the earth. We have to become aware of how utterly devastating the behavior of those that are in power are creating for the rest of us. And we have to also become aware of the fact that it doesn't have to be that way, that we can develop clean breakthrough energy sources, that we can have clean water, we can have fresh organic food, we can create communities that are truly in balance with nature. I really believe that's possible, and we can learn a lesson from some of the indigenous people on that. And I guess the other thing is, if anybody's really interested in what I have to say, I've written several books in English and Spanish. I have a website, brianoleary.com, and you can certainly go there and learn a lot more about what it is I do in my educational programs.
Brian, I have one question from somebody in the audience, and it is, if you watch the movie Avatar, and what are your thoughts about it?
Well, I think it was a wonderful movie. I think that there actually is a real-life Avatar going on here on this planet. I think some of it is being played out in Ecuador. In other words, the oil companies and the military are going into some of the most precious indigenous habitats in the rainforest, in the Amazon rainforest, and that there is a big conflict going there. And the indigenous people want the oil companies to get out. And I think that the story of Avatar is playing out on the Earth right now, and I think that's why it's affected us at such a deep level. So hopefully that movie, and there's a real-life Avatar coming out soon. By the way, it's a documentary film called Yasuni. It's coming out. It's being produced right here in Quito. And it's all about Yasuni National Park and the struggle of the indigenous people against the oil companies that want to go in and drill oil in this very precious habitat. That film will be out in a couple of months, and I hope many of your listeners will listen to it and watch it. And I can tell you more about that once it's out. Okay, great. And what do you feel about the mining that is also happening, and it's also destroying a lot? Same thing. It's drilling for oil. It's transporting the oil, refining the oil, but it's also mining gold and copper. The mining practices so far in Ecuador have been very, very destructive. There's now mercury contamination. The mountainsides where it happens, or the pits where it happened, are very ugly. It's the same thing. Same thing with logging, cutting down trees. There's a huge amount of deforestation going on now. All of these things have got to stop. And I think they can stop if enough of us speak loudly enough and offer alternatives for the economic future for Ecuador and other countries with such precious resources. Yeah, and I'm sure that people will become more aware of alternative things that they can use for construction, for living, and using like the water or the rainwater to pull up the bathroom. And there are things that we can become aware of how to use because they are out there. We just need to. Absolutely. Yeah, we just need to Absolutely.
research.
We had here in Monosueños. We had here at Monosueños about 3 weeks ago, we had a think tank, and we brought in world experts on a number of areas. And one man who runs a company, his name is Charles Blake, he's from Australia,
He runs a company called Ambient Energy, and it's possible for communities like right here in Ecuador to have a self-contained ecosystem of waste management, water, and energy that would not pollute the environment at all. These are all very old concepts that can be used in the future if we all become educated about the possibilities.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm going to upload this interview on the website of Radio Serenidad for other people that could not listen live, that they can listen to, and I will put the information for your website in the website, and I really hope that people get connected to your website and that they research all over and find out like things of like the Harp Project and how it's being damaged, how it damages, and all those things that are not being able to kept secret anymore because somehow, you know, through everything is out there in the internet, and we can, if we know where to research, we will get the information that we need. And so I wanted to thank you so much for your time, Brian. I'm looking forward to meeting you.
Gloria.
I'm really looking forward to meeting you, and Radio Serenidad is always going to be a way of communicating and telling people the best solutions that can be encountered, and I'm very open for that because that's been one of my major concerns, and we concentrate here in there's a lot of information on ecological alternatives that we give to the audience here. Sometimes we do just the programs on that, but that's our we need to we need to come all together and really use this mean to be able to pass people the information that so they can become informed, and we can all do something about it. So I really want to thank you. I'm very thankful for Javier, a friend from Switzerland, that he gave me your information, and I was lucky enough to get it before the workshop so I can go. So, you know, those metaphysical things in the world that happen when they need to happen, and I'm so glad. So I'll be seeing you soon, and thank you very much, Brian.
Well, it's my pleasure, Gloria, and we'll see you soon, and our education will now go to its next level.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, and then we'll continue here and until a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.